My name is Jake, and I've been working at Hartwell Farms for 2 full seasons now. It's one of those family-owned pumpkin patches that transforms into a full Halloween destination every October. Hay rides, petting zoo, apple cider stand, and the main attraction, a 12-acre corn maze that's been featured in 3 Best Fall Activities articles. I'm a junior at State University about 20 minutes away, and the job pays better than anything else I could find that works around my class schedule. The Hartwell family have been running this farm for 4 generations, and they treat their seasonal workers well. Free meals, decent hourly wage, and a bonus if you make it through the entire Halloween season without quitting. Most people don't make it through the entire season. It's not because the work is hard. Hauling pumpkins and directing families through a corn maze isn't exactly manual labour. People quit because of what happens in the maze after we close it to the public. The Hartwells have a strict policy: no employees enter the corn maze after sunset. They say it's for insurance reasons, liability concerns about people getting lost in the dark, but I've learned that some rules, they exist for reasons that have nothing to do with insurance policies. Let me start you with the layout of Hartwell Farms, because understanding the geography is important to what happened. The property covers about 60 acres in total. The farmhouse and the main buildings are at the front, near the county road. Behind that, you've got the pumpkin fields, the petting zoo, and the areas where families come for photos and hay rides. The corn maze takes up the back 12 acres, as far from the road as you can get on the property. It's bordered on 3 sides by dense woods, old growth forest that the Hartwells have never cleared. On the 4th side, there's a creek that runs along the edge of their land. The maze itself is elaborate. Tom Hartwell, the current owner, he designs a new pattern every year using GPS coordinates and aerial photography. This year's design was supposed to represent a giant jack-o'-lantern when viewed from above, complete with triangular eyes and a jagged smile made from the pathways. It takes most people about 45 minutes to an hour to complete the maze during daylight hours. At night, with just the emergency lighting they installed for safety, it would probably take twice as long. Not that anyone's supposed to be in there at night. During my first season last year, I thought the after dark rule was just some standard agricultural safety protocol. Corn mazes can be generally dangerous. It's easy to get lost, panic and hurt yourself trying to push through the stalks or climb over barriers. But there were hints that something else was going on. Sarah, who's been working at the farm for 3 seasons, mentioned during my first week that the maze gets weird after dark. When I asked what she meant, she just said to make sure I was off the property by closing time and not to ask too many questions. Mike, one of the full-time farmhands, told me that the Hartwells had tried running nighttime maze tours a few years back. Halloween haunted maze experience, he called it. They hired actors, set up spooky decorations, the whole 9 yards, but they shut it down after just 3 nights. What happened? I asked. Ask Tom, Mike said, but he probably won't tell you. The most telling comment came from Mrs. Hartwell, Tom's mother, who still helped with the business despite being in her 70s. I was helping her arrange pumpkins in the display area when she mentioned that I reminded her of a young man who worked there a few years back. Sweet boy, about your age, she said. Very responsible, never gave us any trouble. Such a shame what happened to him. What happened? Mrs. Hartwell's expression darkened. He didn't follow the rules about the maze. Found him 3 days later, about 2 miles into the woods. Poor thing had been wandering around in there, completely lost his mind. I didn't think much of these warnings during my first few weeks. The daytime operation kept me busy enough, helping families navigate the maze, operating the hayride tractor, manning the cyber stand. It was actually a pretty fun job. But as October progressed and we got closer to Halloween, I started noticing things. The first strange thing was the sounds. Every evening, as we were closing up and the last families were leaving, I'd hear noises coming from the direction of the maze. Not human voices, but movement, like something large was walking through the cornstalks, but not following the established pathways. I mentioned this to Tom during our nightly closing routine. "Probably deer," he said, not making eye contact. "They come out the woods to feed on the corn, nothing to worry about." But I grew up in rural Pennsylvania. I know what deer sound like when moving through cornfields. This was different, heavier, more deliberate. The second thing I noticed was the emergency lighting system in the maze. During the day, you could see the tall poles with floodlights that were supposed to provide safety illumination for anyone who got stuck in the maze after dark. But every morning, at least half of those lights would be out. "Vandalism," Tom explained when I asked about it. "Kids throw rocks probably. We replace the bulbs every few days." But the pattern of which lights were out seemed intentional. They weren't randomly broken, it was always the lights in the deepest parts of the maze, the sections furthest from the entrance and exit, like something was systematically disabling the lighting in specific areas. The third thing was the smell. About 3 weeks into the season, I started noticing a strange odour near the maze after closing time. It wasn't the normal farm smells, decomposing vegetation, livestock, diesel fuel from the tractors. This was something else, sweet and rotten at the same time, like flowers that had been left in stagnant water for weeks. The smell was strongest near the entrance to the maze, but it seemed to drift out from the deeper sections. Some evenings it was barely noticeable, other nights it was so strong it made my eyes water. When I mentioned it to Sarah, she nodded grimly. "That smell gets worse every year," she said. "Tom says it's just compost from the organic farming operation, but the compost piles are on the other side of the property." "What do you think it is?" Sarah looked around to make sure no one else was listening. "I think something died in that maze, something big, and Tom's been covering it up for years." Halloween was on a Saturday this year, which meant our busiest weekend would be the climax of the entire season. The Hartwells had advertised special extended hours, live music, food vendors, the works. They were expecting over 1,000 visitors on Saturday alone. This week leading up to Halloween, the strange phenomenon around the maze intensified. The sounds were louder and more frequent, more lights were going out each night, and the smell, it was strong enough that some customers commented on it. But the most disturbing development was the effect the maze seemed to be having on people. 3 families came out the maze on Thursday reporting that they'd encountered something in the maze who wasn't supposed to be there. A tall figure in dark clothing who didn't respond when they tried to talk to him, who seemed to be following them through the pathways. Tom dismissed these reports as Halloween pranks, kids in costumes trying to scare other visitors, but the descriptions were consistent. Always the same height, always the same dark clothing, always silent. On Friday, a mother came out the maze in tears, carrying her 6-year-old daughter. The little girl was trembling and kept saying she'd seen the corn man in the deepest part of the maze. "He was made out of corn stalks," the girl told me while her mother was talking to Tom. "But he was walking like a person and he smelled bad." Tom offered the family free admission for the rest of the season and vouchers for the gift shop. Standard customer service protocol for dealing with complaints, but I could see he was worried. That evening, after we closed to the public, Tom gathered all the staff for an emergency meeting. "I know there's been some unusual reports about the maze this week," he said. "I want to remind everyone that our policy about after-hours access is absolute. No one goes into the maze after sunset for any reason. If you hear sounds, see lights, smell anything unusual, you ignore it and just go home." "What if a customer gets lost in there?" asked Jennifer, one of our newer employees. "We have emergency protocols for that situation," Tom said, "but it's never happened. The maze is designed that even if someone gets completely turned around, They eventually find their way out or reach one of the emergency exits. Mike raised his hand. Tom, some of the customers today were asking about the person they saw in the maze. Shouldn't we call the police if someone's trespassing on property? Tom was quiet for a long moment. There's no trespasser. What people are seeing here, it's part of the property. It's been part of the property for longer than any of us have been alive. That statement, it raised more questions than it answered, but Tom made it clear the meeting was over. As we were leaving, Sarah pulled me to the side. Jake, I need to tell you something, she said. I've been working here for 3 years and every Halloween, Tom gives that same speech, and every year, someone doesn't listen. What do you mean? Last year, it was Brandon, the kid who worked the hayride. He thought he was being clever, decided to sneak into the maze after closing to see what was really going on. We found him the next morning, about a half a mile in the woods, completely catatonic. She showed me a photo on her phone, a young man about my age, staring blankly at the camera with an expression of absolute terror frozen on his face. He spent 2 weeks in the psychiatric ward, Sarah said. When we got him out, he couldn't remember anything about that night. But he still won't talk about corn mazes, won't even drive past farm fields. I should have heeded the warnings. I should have finished my shift on Halloween night and gone straight home like everyone else. The curiosity killed the cat, and I've always been too cautious for my own good. Halloween night was chaos. We had lines of families waiting to get into the maze, kids in costumes running everywhere, parents juggling candy and trying to keep track of multiple children. I worked a double shift, helping with the crowd control during the day and then staying late to help with cleanup. By 11 PM, the last customers had left and most of the staff had gone home. It was just me, Tom, and Mike finishing up the nightly shutdown routine. Tom was doing his final walkthrough of the property, checking that all the attractions were secured for the night. Mike was loading leftover pumpkins onto the truck for tomorrow's delivery to the local grocery stores. I was supposed to be cleaning up the area around the maze entrance, but I found myself staring into the pathways, thinking about all the strange reports we've gotten over the past week. The emergency lighting was working better than usual. About half the lights were functioning, which meant you could see maybe 50 feet into the maze from the entrance. Beyond that, it was just darkness and the rustling sound of corn stalks in the wind. That's when I heard it clearly for the first time. Not the random movement sounds I'd been hearing for weeks, but actual footsteps. Slow, deliberate, following one of the pathways deeper into the maze, too heavy to be a deer, too rhythmic to be the wind moving stalks around. Someone was in the maze. I looked around for Tom or Mike, but they were both on the other side of the property. If there really was a trespasser in the maze, I should probably investigate. What if it was some drunk college student who'd hidden in there until after closing? What if they got hurt wandering around in the dark? I grabbed one of the heavy-duty flashlights we use for evening maintenance and headed into the maze. The first section of the maze was familiar territory. During the day, I guided hundreds of families through these pathways. I knew which turn led to dead ends, which passages connected to the main route, where all the emergency exits were located. But at night, with only my flashlight and the scattered emergency lighting, everything looked different. The corn stalks seemed taller, the pathways narrower. Shadows moved in ways that didn't match the wind patterns. I followed the sound of footsteps deeper into the maze. They stayed about 50 yards ahead of me, always just out of sight around the next turn. Whoever it was seemed to know the layout perfectly. They never paused at intersections, never backtracked, never seemed to get lost. After about 10 minutes, I realised I was in the section of the maze I'd never seen before. You see, that should have been impossible. I knew every pathway, every dead end, every shortcut. But the section I was now in didn't match any of the routes I remembered. The passages were wider than normal, and the cornstalks on either side were taller and denser. Some of them had unusual growth patterns, stalks that twisted together in spiral formations, ears of corn that hung in clusters instead of grown individually. I stopped and tried to get my bearings. According to my mental map of the maze, I should be near the centre, close to the nose of the jack-o'-lantern design. But when I looked up, trying to see the emergency lighting that marked the central area, there was nothing but darkness. I pulled out my phone to check the time and maybe use the GPS function to figure out where I was, but my phone showed no signal, which was strange because we had decent cell coverage throughout the property during the day. The footsteps had stopped while I was checking my phone. The maze was completely silent except for the wind through the cornstalks. Then I heard breathing, heavy, laboured breathing, like someone who'd been walking for hours. But it wasn't coming from ahead of me on the path. It was coming from the cornstalks to my right. I shined my flashlight towards the sound, but the beam didn't penetrate more than a few feet into the dense vegetation. The breathing continued, slow and rhythmic, definitely not human. I decided it was time to leave. Whatever was in the maze with me, I didn't want to encounter it directly. I turned around and started back towards what I thought was the entrance, but the pathway behind me had changed. Where there had been clear passage leading back towards the front of the maze, now there was a wall of cornstalks, not a dead end. The stalks were growing directly across the path, as if they'd been there for months. I tried pushing through them, but they were incredibly dense and seemed to grow thicker the more I disturbed them. After a few minutes of struggling, I gave up and looked for an alternative route. The breathing sounds were getting closer, and now I could hear movement in the corn on both sides of the path. Not random rustling, but deliberate movement, like something large was parallel from my route through the maze. I started walking faster, taking turns at random, hoping to find the passage that would lead me back to familiar territory. After what felt like an hour of walking, I had to accept that I was completely lost. Not just lost in the sense of not knowing which turn to take, lost in the sense that the maze I was in now bore no resemblance to the maze I'd entered. The pathways were wrong, the layout was wrong, even the corn itself was wrong. Some of the stalks were 12 feet tall, far higher than normal corn should grow. Others had unusual coloration, deep red kernels, black husks, leaves that seemed to shimmer in my flashlight beam. And the smell that I'd been noticing for weeks was overwhelming now, sweet decay, like fruit left to rot in the sun. It seemed to be coming from the corn itself, as if the plants were decomposing while still growing. I stopped at what appeared to be a four-way junction and tried to think logically about my situation. The maze was only 12 acres total. No matter how lost I was, if I picked a direction and just kept walking straight, I should eventually hit the boundary, either the woods, the creek, or the fence line that separated the maze from the rest of the farm. I chose to go straight, ignoring all turns and intersections, pushing through any vegetation that blocked my path. But after walking straight for what must have been half a mile, I was still surrounded by corn stalks, according to the dimensions of the maze. I should have been well outside the property boundaries by now. It was like the maze was extending as I walked through it, maintaining the same density of pathways and vegetation no matter how far I travelled. I stopped and tried to climb one of the taller cornstalks, hoping to get high enough to see over the maze and orient myself. But when I grabbed the stalk to pull myself up, it felt wrong under my hands. The surface was too smooth, too warm, and when I squeezed it, it felt soft, almost flesh-like. I jerked my hand away and shined my flashlight on the stalk. What I saw made me stumble backwards in horror. It wasn't a corn stalk, it was an arm, a human arm, stretched and elongated, with skin that had taken on the colour and texture of corn husks. The fingers at the top had grown together and hardened into something that resembled corn silk, but I could see the fingernails underneath. I looked around with new understanding. The corn stalks surrounding me weren't plants at all. They were people, dozens of people, maybe hundreds, who had somehow been transformed into a grotesque parody of corn plants. Some were more recognisable than others. I could see faces pressed into the stalks, eyes closed, mouths open in silent screams, faces distorted but unmistakably human. Others had changed so completely that only the basic humanoid shape remained, and all of them was still alive. I could see the subtle rise and fall of breathing, the slight movement that indicated consciousness. They were aware of what happened to them, trapped in plant-like bodies but still thinking, still feeling. The breathing sounds I'd been hearing weren't coming from some creature moving through the maze. They were coming from the maze itself. Hundreds of transformed people, all trying to breathe through mouths that had been sealed shut and throats that had been restructured in plant matter. I started running then, crashing through the pathways without any sense of direction, just trying to get away from the field of human scarecrows that surrounded me. But no matter which way I ran, there were more of them. The entire maze was made up of transformed people, arranged in neat rows like any other crop, their bodies serving as the walls and barriers that created the pathways. Some of them were recent transformations. I could still see clothing fibres embedded in their bark-like skin, or hair that hadn't quite turned into corn silk yet. Others looked like they'd been there for years, decades even, their human features almost completely absorbed into the plant structure. As I ran through the maze of living scarecrows, I started recognising some of them. There was Brandon, the kid Sarah had told me about. His face was still mostly human, though his skin had taken on a greenish tint, and his hair was turning into corn silk. His eyes were open and aware, tracking my movement as I passed. Behind him was another young man I didn't recognise, but who wore the remnants of a Hartwell farm staff shirt, probably the employee Mrs. Hartwell had mentioned, the one who'd been found in the woods, completely lost his mind. And deeper in the maze, I found older transformations, people wearing clothing styles from the 1990s, the 1980s, even earlier. All of them seasonal workers or curious visitors who ventured into the maze after dark and had been claimed by whatever force controlled this place. I was starting to understand the true scope of what was happening at Hartwell Farms. This wasn't just a recent phenomenon. It had been going on for decades. The maze wasn't just built on the land, it was built from the people who'd gotten lost in it. And that's when I heard the voice. "You shouldn't have come here." I spun around, trying to locate the source. The voice seemed to come from everywhere at once, echoing off the living walls of the maze. "But since you're here, you might as well understand." A figure stepped out from between two of the transformed people. At first glance, he looked normal, an older man in work clothes, maybe in his 60s. But as he got closer, I could see that his skin had taken the same bark-like texture as the others, and his hair was shot through with corn silk. "My name is Harold Hartwell," he said. "I built the maze in 1952. Harold Hartwell, Tom's grandfather, the original owner of the farm. According to family history, he died in the 1980s, but here he was, speaking to me in the middle of a maze made from human corn. "You're supposed to be dead," I said. Harold laughed, and the sound was like wind through dry stalks. "Death is relative when you become part of the land. I died as a human, yes, but I was reborn as something much more useful." He gestured to the transformed people surrounding us. "Each of these individuals made the same choice you're about to make. They came into my maze after dark, seeking answers to questions they didn't understand." "What questions?" "Why does the corn grow so well here? Why is our harvest bigger every year? Why do our pumpkins grow larger and sweeter than anyone else's in the country?" Harold walked closer, and I could see that his feet had grown roots that extended down into the soil. He wasn't standing on the ground, he was growing from it. "The secret is good farming, son, is proper fertilization. And the best fertilizer is human consciousness, properly prepared and integrated into the crop cycle." "You're insane," I said, backing away from him. "I'm practical," Harold replied. "This land was dying when my family first settled here. Poor soil, bad drainage, harsh winters. We were going to lose the farm. He gestured to the thriving corn stalks around us. But I found a way to make it productive. A way to ensure that the Hartwell farms would be successful for generations. By turning people into plants. By giving them purpose. These individuals were lost, confused, looking for meaning in their lives. Now they have meaning. They're part of something larger than themselves. They're feeding families, supporting local agriculture, contributing to the community. Harold's transformation was much more advanced than the others. I could see that his arms were starting to branch out like corn stalks, and his torso was developing the segmentation structure of a plant stem. Tom knows about this, I asked. Tom maintains the family business, just as his father did before him. The maze is self-sustaining. I handle the recruitment and the transformation. He handles the public relations and logistics. This is murder, I said. This is agriculture, Harold corrected, and you're going to be part of it whether you understand it or not. He raised his arms and I could hear movement through the maze. The transformed people were shifting, turning towards me, their plant-like bodies rustling with anticipation. The transformation process is quite interesting, Harold said. First, your nervous system integrates with the root network. You'll be able to communicate with every other plant in the maze, sharing their collective consciousness. Then your circulatory system adapts the process. You'll derive energy directly from sunlight, no need for food or water. Finally, your skeletal structure restructures itself to support vertical growth. You'll be taller, stronger, more useful as a crop barrier. I turned and ran again, but this time the maze seemed to be actively working against me. Pathways closed as I approached them, new walls of corn people sprouting up to block my escape route. The transformed individuals were moving now, their root systems sliding through the soil to redeposit iron themselves. They were herding me, driving me towards the central location deeper into the maze. I tried to push through a gap between two of the corn people, but they moved together to block me. One of them, a woman who still had mostly human features, grabbed my arm with a hand that felt like rough bark. Don't fight it, she whispered. Her voice sounded like wind through leaves. It's not so bad once you accept it. You become part of something beautiful. I pulled free and kept running, but I was running out of options. The maze was contracting around me, the transformed people moving closer with each step. Finally, I reached what appeared to be the centre of the maze. It was a circular clearing about 30 feet across, with rich black soil that looked like it had been tilled recently. Harold was waiting for me there, along with something I hadn't seen before, a massive corn plant, easily 20 feet tall, with dozens of ears growing from its stalk. But looking closer, I could see that the ears weren't corn kernels. They were human heads, dozens of them, in various stages of transformation, some still recognisably human and others nearly indistinguishable from actual corn ears. The mother's plant, Harold explained. The central consciousness that coordinates the entire maze. Every person who joins us becomes part of her extended nervous system. She's been growing for 70 years now, fed by the life force of everyone who's been transformed. She's the reason our crops are so successful, the reason our soil is so fertile, the reason the Hartwell farms have thrived when other farm operations have failed. I could hear voices coming from the mother plant, dozens of them, all whispering at once. Some were begging for help, others were trying to warn me to run, and still others seemed to be welcoming me to join them. Your transformation will be especially valuable, Harold said. Young people adapt better to the change. Your consciousness will help strengthen the collective, and your physical form will make an excellent addition to next year's maze expansion. The transformed people had formed a circle around the clearing, cutting off any escape route. Harold approached me, his root-like feet leaving trails in the soft soil. Any last questions before we begin? I had one desperate idea. During my orientation at the farm, Tom had mentioned that you used a Pacific type of herbicide for weed control in the corn maze. Industrial strength, the kind that would kill any plant matter it came into contact with. The maintenance shed was about a quarter-mile from the maze, but it contained several tanks of herbicide along with the spraying equipment. Actually, yes, I said. How do you plan to explain my disappearance? I'm a college student with family and friends who will notice if I go missing. Harold seemed amused by the question. The same way we explained all the others. You left work as usual, drove home, and then disappeared sometime during the night. Probably ran off with a girlfriend or dropped out of school due to stress. These things happen to young people all the time. While he was talking, I was slowly moving towards the edge of the clearing, trying to get closer to the gap between two of the transformed people. The local police stopped investigating disappearances around the farms years ago, Harold continued. Too many cases, not enough evidence. They assumed it's just the transient nature of the seasonal agricultural work. I made my move, sprinting towards the gap I'd identified. The two corn people tried to close ranks, but I managed to squeeze through just as their bark-covered arms swung towards me. I could hear Harold shouting behind me and the sound of dozens of transformed people moving through the maze in pursuit, but I had a head start and I knew the general direction of the maintenance shed. The maze tried to confuse me, spawning new pathways and dead ends, but I pushed through anything that blocked my path. Some of the corn people tried to grab me as I passed, but their plant-like bodies were slower than my human reflexes. After what felt like an eternity of running, I burst out of the maze and found myself in the familiar territory of the main farm. The maintenance shed was visible in the distance, outlined against the pre-dawn sky. I reached the shed and broke the lock with a rock. Inside, I found exactly what I was looking for, a tank sprayer loaded with industrial herbicide and a portable pump system. I strapped the tank to my back and grabbed the spray nozzle, then headed back towards the maze. I could see movement in the corn stalks near the entrance. Harold and his army of plant people were emerging to stop me. "You don't understand what you're doing," Harold called out as I approached. "Destroy the maze and you'll kill hundreds of people." "They're already dead," I shouted back. "You killed them when you turned them into plants." I started spraying the herbicide at the corn people blocking the entrance to the maze. The effect was immediate and horrifying. Their plant-like bodies began to wither and smoke, releasing screams that sounded more human than vegetable. But I didn't stop. I pushed deeper into the maze, spraying everything I could reach. Behind me, I could hear the transformed people collapsing as the herbicide destroyed the plant matter that had replaced their human tissue. Some of them thanked me as they died, others cursed me for ending their existence. A few just screamed until their voices gave out. I made it to the centre of the maze, where the mother plant was reefing in anticipation of my arrival. Harold stood in front of her, his own transformation accelerating as he tried to merge completely with the plant network. "She sustained this community for decades," he said, "fed families, provided jobs, kept the farm profitable. You're destroying something beautiful." "I'm ending something monstrous," I replied, and started spraying the mother plant with concentrated herbicide. The mother plant's death was the most terrible thing I've ever witnessed. As the herbicide ate through her massive structure, I could hear the voices of everyone she'd absorbed over the decades. Hundreds of people, all crying out at once as they were finally released from their plant-based prison. Harold collapsed as his connection to the mother plant was severed. His human consciousness returned just long enough for him to understand what was happening. "You killed us all," he whispered, then crumbled into mush and root matter. I continued spraying until the entire centre of the maze was dead and withered. Then I worked my way back towards the entrance, destroying every transformed person I encountered. By sunrise, the 12-acre corn maze had been reduced to a field of dead and dying vegetation. I called 911 from the farm office, reported a chemical spill that had destroyed the corn maze. When the authorities arrived, they found exactly what I told them. Tom Hartwell arrived on the scene after noon. When he saw the destroyed maze, He looked relieved rather than upset. "It's over," he asked me quietly. "It's over," I confirmed. He nodded and walked away without another word. The farm closed permanently 2 weeks later. The Hartwell family cited financial difficulties and insurance problems related to the chemical spill. They sold the property to a housing developer who's planning to build a subdivision on the site. I finished out the semester at college, but I transferred to a different school for the spring. It's just too many memories in that area, too many questions from people who knew I'd been working at the farm when it closed. I've been doing my research on similar operations, family farms with unusual successful crop yields, seasonal attractions that have been running for decades with minimal changes to their core operations. There are more of them than you think, and they all have certain things in common: remote locations, large seasonal workforce turnover, and strict policies about after-hours access to certain areas of the property. If you're looking for seasonal work this fall, be careful about family farms with attractions like corn mazes or hay rides. Pay attention to employee policies that seem overly restrictive. Notice if any workers seem nervous about certain areas of the property. And if you're ever visiting a farm attraction and you notice that the corn seems unusually tall, or the pathways seem to change layout between visits, or you hear sounds that don't quite match what you'd expect from normal agricultural operations, don't investigate, don't stay after closing, and definitely don't venture into any corn maze after dark. Some family traditions are worth preserving, others need to be ended with extreme prejudice. I kept 1 tank of industrial herbicide. It's in my apartment closet now, along with a portable sprayer and some protective equipment, just in case I encounter another operation like the Hartwell farms. Because I have a feeling that 70 years of successful agriculture doesn't happen in isolation. There are other farms out there, other families who discovered the same terrible secret about proper fertilization, and they need to be ready to end them too.